Okay, we're live.
Say when. Ready? Let's go. If we may have a roll call, please.
Sure. Director Asner?
Here.
Director Faulkner?
Here.
Director Goodman? Here. Director Ives? Here. Director Patra? Here. Vice President Brown?
Here.
And President Cuneo?
Here. Before we get started, I know that we don't have to do a Pledge of Allegiance, but it seems we're having 3 meetings. We should at least ground ourselves with a Pledge of Allegiance. If you wouldn't mind, let's all stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, we have the policies that we're going to be voting on today. Ms. Schechter, do you bring us up to date?
Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Brown, and the SSD Board of Directors. I'm Amy Schechter, the Chief Human Resources Officer. You have before you this evening a proposed revision to temporary policy GBBDB, which is the COVID-19 leave of absence policy. You'll find on page 2 of that policy, we added a new category, the COVID-19 vaccine leave. The information included in that would first and foremost stress that the vaccine is not mandatory for employees, even though the district strongly encourages that and will be taking steps in order to try to facilitate the vaccination of as many staff as possible. It is not something that we will be making mandatory. However, eligible staff who choose to receive the COVID-19 vaccine will most likely be notified of an appointment. They won't have the opportunity to select that. And so if that appointment is during their workday, we'd like them to go ahead and take advantage of getting that done. So this policy is twofold with vaccine leave. First, it would allow them to take up to 4 hours of leave in order to receive the vaccine if it's during their regularly scheduled work hours, for either the first and or second dose of the vaccine. And then those staff that do receive the vaccine may exhibit some side effects, typically in the 12 to 24 hours following, but we're going to allow a full day of vaccine leave that would be paid for each dose of the vaccine within 48 hours of receiving that vaccine, or either the first and or second dose of the vaccine. Do you want me to stop? And then, okay, sorry. Okay. When Mark gets up, I stop. So, okay, so they have symptoms within 48 hours of getting the vaccine. They can take a full day of leave, first and or second dose, just because we can't predict how an individual is going to react. Obviously, if their symptoms are severe enough that they might want to take additional days, then they would take their PTO day on the second or any subsequent days following that. And then, of course, we would just ask for written verification in order to use the leave like we do in any other case. Like I said, this is included in the temporary policy that is set to expire on June 30th. What questions do you have?
I think this is an excellent idea. I just want to make sure that the union understands that we are working for their benefits. And when we go back to contract negotiation, that they remember this. The other thing I'd like, just as what other districts are doing this? Any?
Not that I am aware of at this time.
We're a little bit ahead of some of the other districts. Some of them have talked about it, but they were just starting to think about it 2 weeks ago when we brought this up to them. So, which I think is good because I want to make sure that we're taking into consideration the concerns that our staff are having with the vaccines and that process. So some other districts do have unlimited time off and PTO time, so that does play into some of it. So there's a handful of districts in the county that do that, but this covers our staff. And the big thing around this is we want to make sure that our staff don't feel like if they're in a partner district that partner districts are doing this and they have to take their own PTO time, and we don't want to have that. We We want to make sure that there's equivalency in terms of how they're being supported in those other districts.
I have a quick question. Just looking at the first paragraph of the actual policy, eligible part-time professional staff are offered these leaves on a pro-rata basis. Does that apply to the COVID vaccine leave as well? And how would that be applied?
That would be applied then, so if they aren't scheduled to work on the day that they get their vaccine, they couldn't take another part-time day off. So part-time staff that are less than full-time have schedules that they work, so it would only be if it's on that scheduled day. It wouldn't just, it's not like everybody gets the 4 hours in their bank to use when they want.
Got it, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Any other questions on? I have I need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I need a roll call on this one.
Director Asner,
Yes.
Director Faulkner,
Yes.
Director Goodman. Yes. Director Ide. Yes. Director Patra. Yes. Vice President Brown.
Yes.
President Cuneo.
Yes. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Okay, I need a roll call again on this one.
Director Asner,
Yes.
Director Faulkner,
Yes.
Director Goodman. Yes. Director Ide. Yes. Director Patra. Yes. Vice President Brown
Yes.
and President Cuneo.
Yes. All right, now we get to switch to our third meeting.
Yes.
This one.
So we're logging out. Oh, don't log out.
No, don't log out?
Yeah, there's
Don't log, I logged out.
another. There's another,
Yeah.
there's this one.
Oh,
Same.
wait.
It's the same
Oh,
one.
it is the same
Yeah.
one. Oh, fantastic.
They put this pad in front of it, I'm like, I said it. Yeah.
All righty. On the work-study meeting, they do have a Pledge of Allegiance on us, and since we have the Pledge of Allegiance, we'll just do a call to order.
Director Asner,
Here.
Director Faulkner,
Here.
Director Goodman. Here. Director Ide. Here. Director Patra. Here. Vice President Brown
Here.
and President Cuneo.
Here. And for those who are just joining us, we had the Pledge of Allegiance at 5 minutes ago at the prior meeting. So we will start with the 5-year plan for curriculum and instruction.
Thank you.
Please.
So we have 3 presentations tonight. So the first one is Dr. Bolton, who is the Director of Teaching and Learning, and she will be talking about the 5-year plan for curriculum and instruction. Dr. Bolton?
Right. Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Brown, Board of Directors. My name is Molly Bolton. I am the Executive Director of Teaching, Learning, and Accountability, and I'm here tonight to present the 5-year curriculum and instruction plan. So the purpose of this presentation is just to inform you of the 5-year plan for curriculum and instruction. And what I'd like to do first, next slide, is to kind of go through a few definitions, because there often is confusion between the difference between curriculum and instruction. So I just want to clarify that as we get started. So curriculum is the what, not the how. So it's really the content of what we're teaching our students. It does provide continuity across the district when we have a curriculum, so that no matter which of our schools you are in, we have the same standards for learning. It also talks about what we want our students to know and be able to do at the end of that curriculum. And it is a guide for student success, and it ensures that all state standards are addressed. When we think about instruction, this is how you teach the curriculum. So this is where our instructional methods come in. This is where we might integrate technology. This is where we differentiate depending on students' needs, and we utilize materials and different learning strategies to teach the students. So that's the instructional piece. Both of them are really important, and both of them affect student learning. So you have to have a strong curriculum, but you also have to have strong instruction. Slide, please. This is just kind of a graphic to help with this a little bit. So you see we have curriculum, we have instruction, and we also have assessment, and all of those pieces play into student learning. So we have to have strong components of all three in order for our students to learn. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do tonight is I am going to go through the 5-year plan goals that we have. This is an overview, and then I'll go into each one more in depth to give you the action plan. So the first goal is that curriculum would be reviewed and updated regularly for the SSD schools and the career and technical schools. The second is looking more on the instructional side, where we'll be looking at instructional materials and textbooks and making sure those are refreshed on a regular schedule. The third is really looking at the instructional piece, that it is supplemented and augmented in the partner districts to meet the needs of all of our students by providing those tiered levels of support. And the fourth being that staff has provided able to provide high quality instruction using high leverage practices and high yield strategies. Slide, please. So looking at our first goal, this is developing a curriculum cycle, a calendar of review for both our SSD schools and our career and technical. So just to remind you of our curriculum review process, and this is something you guys get to see every June when I bring the curriculum to the board. We start with looking at a curriculum that is up for review or for write, and we look at the different data. So that data would include current state standards, assessment results, the implementation, checking with our teachers to see how implementation is going, and really just kind of looking at the effectiveness. Once we do that, we move then to looking at, is the curriculum aligned to those state standards? Because by state law, we have to have curriculum aligned to state standards. Once we determine that, then we ask the question of, is our curriculum optimally effective? And this is where we would talk with our teachers. We would look at our student assessment data, making sure our students are showing growth, and those sorts of things. If yes, then that's the end of our cycle. If no, then that's when we would go in and revise the curriculum or update the curriculum. Then we would do a stakeholder review. That stakeholder review includes all teaching staff and administrative staff, as well as we have a family review night where families are invited to come in and review our curriculum. And then we bring it to you guys for board approval. Once it is board approved, we then move into training and implementation. So this gives you a snapshot of the curriculum review calendars for our special education schools. We do a 4-year curriculum review cycle, so you'll notice that the 2021 school year and the 24-25 school year are mirrored. We try to align it with the major 4 content areas of math, science, social studies, and ELA. So we're not reviewing those big curriculums all at the same time in 1 year. So that's why we use a 4-year cycle for that. You'll also see a lot of our other curriculums are split in there on that 4-year process as well. Next slide, please. Our tech programs, we have a lot more of them. So we do have a 5-year cycle for them, and you'll notice that there are a lot more of them within each year. And so we have this calendar for these courses. Also, though, if we do have a major change in standards or our curriculum advisory committees, which are stakeholders in the community for those particular areas, may advise us to review a curriculum out of cycle if there have been changes. Next slide, please. That leads us to our second goal, which is looking at materials. So those could be textbooks, those could be instructional materials. And so we have developed a resource review cycle for both. And then also another action step in this that I'm going to talk about is creating and implementing a centralized purchasing system for curriculum and instruction for our programs across the district. Slide, please. So this is for our special education school. Typically, when we purchase a textbook adoption, they run a 6-year cycle. That's the license that they give us. You can buy 1 year and purchase it every year, or you can buy a 6-year cycle. And typically their textbook revisions happen on a 6-year cycle. That's the way the companies kind of work. So we are kind of tied to that. Once we adopt a resource, we typically will have it for that 6 years. Now, if a company comes out with addendums, we are kind of, I guess you could say, in contract with them for 6 years because we've purchased for the 6-year license, and so we will receive those updates, as a part of that adoption. Okay. Slide, please. Our tech schools have not had a formal material adoption process. We are in the process of implementing that starting this year, where we will actually have them on a cycle. It typically used to be as the instructor or the advisory board recommended reviewing materials, they would then look at them. So we had some programs who were getting new materials every year, some programs who had gone 6 or 7 years without updating their materials. So we are going to put them on a cycle so that we can regularly review and make sure we have the best materials available for those programs. Just because they're up for review doesn't necessarily mean that they may adopt new materials. However, it's the opportunity to make sure their materials are up to date. Again, if we had from our advisory board or from another accrediting body, the need for us to adopt out of cycle, we would address that. Next slide, please. Our centralized purchasing, I want to spend a little bit of time here, just kind of talking about the purpose and the rationale. So one of the things we've heard, as you'll see on the rationale slide, from our voice of customer, especially from our teachers in the partner districts, is there's not always equity in resources across the county. And so this process would help us address some of that. So the purpose would be ensuring that our teachers have research-based, evidence-based materials for our students, and that those materials meet the needs of our students. It also will allow us to access more discounts because instead of each area coordinator buying little chunks, we can combine those together into a larger order and access discounts because it's a bulk order. So the process we would use is we would have an approved list of materials, and I am going to change the word vendor to materials, and you'll see why. And any purchases of those materials that are on that approved list wouldn't require additional justification because those materials have been vetted by content experts in our district. And they are also in our resource guides, which are available to our partner districts, to all of our staff and our administrators to review. They also, the vendors outside of that, or the materials outside of what has been vetted and approved, they could access through a justification form. What that justification form allows us to do is look at what need is not being met, and then look at the materials they are requesting and ensure that they are research and evidence-based. And that would also allow us to identify if we may have a gap somewhere in our resources that we could then use for other districts as well. Slide.
Could you go back to the slide you just run? I didn't understand materials. Why was it ever vendors?
It was just, as I was creating it, I put vendors instead of materials.
Okay, I thought maybe
I apologize for that.
I was trying to figure out why we would,
Yeah.
might have been vendors, okay.
Yeah. So instead of the companies, it would be the specific materials from those
That
companies.
makes sense.
So, yeah.
Dr. Bolton, could you give a couple examples of this inequity? I don't know if that's what you're going to get to now, but could you give us some examples of inequities that or currently have some questions?
So, yeah, I will have some examples right in this next slide, if that's okay. And if I don't answer it, please ask it again. So, one of the big pieces is to provide the equity of resources. So we've looked at a lot of our voice of customer data. We survey our teachers a lot. We do a lot of program evaluations. So we have a lot of voice of customer data. And so addressing inconsistent implementation of programming across the district, that piece came from the climate survey, the Wilson Reading System evaluation, as well as the Gibson operational audit. So we saw that theme across those three reports. Address inequitable distribution of resources, including staffing and materials across the county. That information came from the engagement survey, the Wilson Reading System evaluation, superintendent's focus group, Gibson operational audit, as well as the educator evaluation survey. We saw that theme. The need for curriculum-based training and social-emotional, as well as teaching methods for specific disability groups. We heard that theme come through with our professional development needs assessment survey, our para retention study, as well as our Academy One, which is our beginning teachers report. Did that answer your question?
So what is inconsistent implementation of programming? What does that mean?
So meaning if I was in Lindbergh, I might receive this programming, but if I move to Hazelwood, that might not be available for me.
Because of the materials or because?
Could be because of the materials or training. Yeah.
I think the other problem with it is if you don't ask, sometimes if you don't know you can ask, a lot of our teachers don't, and so therefore we shouldn't. The reason we want to look at it is essentially we're saying you don't have to ask for it. It's our job to make sure you have what you need, and this way we're kind of saying with those, the inequities is if you have a district that has an area coordinator or a director who's very active and knows what to ask for and gets it for the staff. But what we're finding is a lot of our staff are purchasing things on their own when we were like, we could absolutely do that together. So it's not just everybody kind of having to buy and pay for it out of their own budget.
We have been hearing about that for years, that certain districts seem to have no more of what's available than other districts do, and so that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so this would make have everybody be aware and have access to resources, all the same resources. And then the last point is, again, accessing those discounts. So we know that teachers and students may not have had access previously due to budget constraints, due to not knowing and being able to ask, but now they could have access. And then we can also better manage our resources to ensure they're being used. We don't want to spend $2,000 on some materials and they sit on a shelf somewhere and no one used them. So this would allow us to know who has what and follow up with them to make sure they have the proper training and that material is working for their students. So we could look at their student data and ensure that their students are growing. So it would just give us a more globalized look at what's going on and how to monitor that. And then also, it targets us in on our professional learning. So we can really target our professional learning and our coaching opportunities around the same materials instead of this teacher has this and this teacher has this and this teacher has this and trying to be an expert on all of those. It really helps us align our expertise. Next slide, please.
And Dr. Goldberg, with that point too, if I'm a teacher and I purchase something, a program or curriculum, and I know this firsthand when I was a teacher and I wasn't fully trained in it, then the fidelity of the program is not going to be as effective. And so this way, we know if they're purchasing it, we will be able to provide these supports and the training so they don't have to try to figure it out. And for example, when I was a teacher, it was at Orton Gillingham. Until I had the full training, it wasn't like I was able to really fully understand the scope of and the fidelity of the program.
And that's really important because if we look at the research and evidence, it's based on doing the program with fidelity. So we're not going to get those results if we're not implementing that with fidelity. So we want to be able to support our teachers to do that. Our third goal is Our instruction is able to supplement or augment the partner district's instruction and curriculum to meet the needs of all students. And this gets into our integrated tiered models of support. So our strategy would be to annually review and revise those integrated tiered models. And if you remember us talking about that before, that's where we're looking at each district and what they have to offer, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. We're identifying gaps, if there are, and helping to support those areas that might have gaps. So it would be the tiered models, the gap analysis, and then from that comes the professional learning plans. And then we would also be able to support districts that we've identified as targeted through our multi-tiered system of support facilitators, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on this next slide. Next slide, please. So these were formerly our PBIS facilitators, and we have done a program evaluation this year. One of the opportunities that came up is many of our districts are doing a broader model of a multi-tiered system of supports rather than specifically PBIS, which is just one model of a multi-tiered system of supports. So these would really focus with districts at that systems level change and really work to build that strong Tier 1 or that universal that all students receive in general education. And they may also focus on some specific initiatives that a district might choose, such as restorative practices or trauma-informed. Yeah.
So could you do me a favor? When you use PBIS or you use one of the acronyms, go on the grounds that we have people here
Sure.
who may not be all familiar with the acronyms. Could you explain
Yep.
each of those, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So PBIS is positive behavior intervention supports, okay? And multi-tiered systems of supports, we often call that MTSS. That's another acronym that we use for that. And so PBIS, being that positive behavior support system, is one type of a multi-tiered intervention system.
So you'll keep PBIS, but you'll just have others as well?
So we will have, we'll go more general, so that we can target in. If we have a district picking PBIS, then yep, we could come in and support that. If we have a district picking RTI, response to intervention, we could go in and support that. If we have, and CI3T, I'm not exactly sure what all that stands for, but that's another model. And we could go in and support that because we're supporting it at that systems approach rather than a specific targeted one. We've had some districts who don't want to go PBIS and they hear that we have PBIS facilitators that can support them and they're like, but we're not doing PBIS. When really our facilitators can support any of those system frameworks. And so we can also help the district set up data systems and analyze those key data sources. You might ask, why would we do this? Because it has a direct effect on special education. So if we have a strong Tier 1 in a general education district, we have kids, those systems in place, we're able to analyze that data, and that typically, if they have a strong system in place, we have less referrals, or less referrals who don't end with a diagnosis. So it really helps in the long run all kids. Next slide, please. Our last goal is staff are supported to provide that high-quality instruction to students utilizing both high-leverage practices as well as high-yield strategies. When we talk about high-leverage practices, we're talking about those things that the Council for Exceptional Children identified as having major impact on students with special education. Some things that you might see under there would be things like explicit instruction, things like collaborating with families. When we talk about high-yield strategies, we tend to talk about Robert Marzano. Things like identifying similarities and differences, having strong vocabulary instruction, so some of those narrower strategies. So this goal really is looking at that professional learning. And so one of the things that we have talked about with our focus on instruction model is that we are shifting from instructional facilitators into instructional coaches that will actually be assigned out into the districts to support a caseload of special education teachers. They'll be supporting them in the three major areas, one of those being the high leverage practices, the second being universal support, so those things that we have to have in place in a classroom for students to be successful, such as rules and routines, such as making sure the environment is set up in a way that's conducive for learning. And the third area is our classroom learning systems, which is our PDSA cycles, our learning cycles where we're looking at and targeting and looking at student data to ensure that they are learning. So that would be their areas of focus. The second would be streamlining the supports for our Tier 2 and Tier 3. So this gets into our specific content areas. Right now, we have 5 literacy coaches that service the district, and they are literacy experts. So if you have a concern, if you have a teacher who maybe has, you're looking for a program because you have students not making progress in literacy, these coaches can come in and support. They do the professional learning for our reading intervention programs, as well as coaching support around a multitude of areas dealing with literacy. The other piece that I would like to do that I've asked for through the budgeting process is formalized math coaches. As you know from looking at our student data over the past few years, our math scores have not been great, and that's the same as it is across the state. That's not unique to special school districts, but I would like to formalize support in the area of math. When you look at our integrated tiered model that our directors have put together with the partner districts, math is a consistent area of concern. And so by having formalized math coaches, we'll be able to give that same level of support we have for literacy to numeracy. The other pieces are our effective practice specialists. So we have autism effective practice specialists and social emotional behavioral effective practice specialists. Both of these have specific content expertise in the areas of autism and social emotional behavioral. Currently, we have 3 to serve the whole district. Through the budgeting process, I'm going to ask for 2 additional in each area so we can have 5. With 5 of each of these 4 supports, we will be able to do teams where we can target focus across the county, do 5 areas of the county, and be able to really have an interdisciplinary team working with those instructional coaches that are in those districts to really provide our teachers with the support they need to effectively or have our students achieve. The other piece is our paraprofessional learning. When you look at our para study, one of the things that came out was paraprofessionals want to learn more about supporting instruction with our students. And so we are designing a 3-year induction plan mirroring what we have with our new teachers, where they will get targeted support in the area of instruction and behavioral support and all of those pieces. With that, I am asking again for another position, a dedicated 1-person facilitator who could oversee that training and follow up and ensure that that training is meeting the needs and making our paras even more effective in supporting our teachers and supporting our students. The next one is we are going to do some focused professional learning with administrators around instructional leadership as well as the special education process. That, again, ties back to the focus on instruction model, where we're really looking at having our administrators be those strong instructional leaders and our special education coordinators, formerly known as area coordinators, becoming the experts in supporting our special education process. We will also be doing foundational professional learning and literacy and math for all of our teachers. Right now, we are in the midst of piloting a program called Letters and a program called Numbers. This is very foundational teaching of the tenets of literacy and the tenets of math. And so with these foundational trainings and ensuring that our teachers have those, we will feel that they are ready then to move on to specialized instruction as well, because they'll have that foundational piece. It used to be folks came out of college with that. What we're finding is a lot of our teachers don't have that. And so we need to take up the reins and build that for them.
Why do you think that is?
That's a good question.
They don't teach in college anymore?
I think there maybe isn't quite as much focus as there used to be in the past. You know, I think there's a lot of other pieces that have come down from the state that you have to include in teacher preparation programs. And I think it's kind of gotten watered down in some places. But the fact is, you know, we have teachers coming out of very respectable universities to us, and they just don't have that foundational, you know, and it's not just one or two. So we know it's a systems piece. This is something that the state of Missouri has taught, especially in the area of literacy with the dyslexia law. They are looking at strengthening that in the science of reading in teacher induction programs. So I think they realize it's a problem as well. But we got to do something about it because it's our kids who are suffering. So we've got to build those skills for them. The last piece, and this will be a future piece, will be offering summer learning institutes for both teachers and administrators. And what we'd like to do here is not only offer that to our special education administrators, but also our general education administrators to help them understand special education more deeply so that they can be partners in that. Next slide.
On the summer learning institutes for teachers, will we partner with universities so people can get credit for that?
That's a great idea. We can definitely research that.
I'm just going on the grounds that when we're talking about growing our own, it would be nice to.
I think that would be a great possibility. Yeah. So we'll definitely look into that. The last piece that I want to share with you is an additional handout that I have given you. And this is a document that we have, it's in draft form. You'll see draft on the top. We are still working on it a little bit, but I did want to give you a preview. The purpose of this document is really to help administrators and teachers understand the supports we have in place for them and how they can access those supports. And so what you'll see here is a document that has a lot of our support staff on each page. So we're looking at ABA associates. We're looking at instructional coaches as we're moving to that focus on instruction model. Our literacy coaches, our social emotional effective practice specialists, our autism effective practice specialists, measurement and assessment coaches, which look at our data. Math coaches, if we're able to secure those positions, would be included in there. You see the multi-tiered systems of support facilitator, formerly known as the PBIS facilitator. Also, you'll see the nonviolent crisis intervention training facilitator. We do have one of those for the district who organizes and stays abreast of all the changes with NCI. And we also have a professional learning technology specialist. There's one of those in our district too that really help us to infuse and develop professional learning around technology for our teachers as well as our professional learning staff. And then that last position, if we're able to secure it, being that paraprofessional facilitator that would oversee those training pieces. What you'll see is we have divided it up into a few buckets, if you will, what their responsibilities might look like. So we have instructional supports, behavioral support, professional learning, and then other tasks that they might be asked to do. Our hope is that this document will really help our administrators and our teachers, as well as our partner district staff, really understand the supports we have available and be able to reach out to the right person for the right thing. And so we're really hopeful that this document can kind of help clarify some of those pieces.
Who is this document going to?
So it will go to, it will be presented to directors and then be published on SSD Life, our intranet, for our teachers, and then we are also going to be sharing it with our district liaisons in the partner districts.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. And that is the end of the presentation. Any other questions that you might have?
Yes, I do. I have a question. In going back to the curriculums for your tech school.
Yes.
If a student wanted to learn productions, cameras, lights, sound, which one of those classes would he take?
I would need to check with Kevin Baker on that one. I don't believe we have a production course, and I believe he's been in conversation with us about that previously.
Yes.
And so this is just the current courses we offer right now, but we are always evolving and looking at other courses that might be avenues for our students and may have student interest. And then as those were added, we would add in the curriculum piece for that.
Okay, so I'm hoping and I'm assuming that having asked that question, that there's been some views in reference to the amount of opportunities that exist. They also are union. And if I may, in 1999, first time that I came here, there was only one African American who was a part of a union of any of those particular skill sets in the state of Missouri. But yet the opportunities for work were many available, and they're increasing rapidly all the time in every aspect, from sports to entertainment to even now with virtual learning. You know, you have to have someone to be able to help produce that particular piece.
Absolutely.
But yet in a field of that nature that has so many different outlets, we seem to be maybe slowful on recognizing, you know, where opportunities are going and being able to keep pace with giving those opportunities, you know, availability to students. You know, I see that we have fashion design and cosmetology and various courses of that nature, but they're not union as we're pushing for other kinds of trade scenarios. And so I just wanted to know if, you know, we're looking at 2024, we've at least gone to the point of saying this is 2 or 3 years down the road and what our plans are. And over that period of time, these opportunities will be unfolding. But yet there won't be an opportunity for students to take advantage of the timing that the unfolding are taking place.
And we do have a process in order to introduce new courses and research new courses. This would just be a review calendar of what we currently have. But if there was a new course introduced or we wanted to pursue a new course, we would definitely research that, look into the interest level, follow the process for that, and then it would be added to the calendar. So it wouldn't be that this is set for 5 years and we would never add anything or look at anything else.
Okay.
You know, it would be added in at that time.
Okay.
Because we know those opportunities are always changing for our students, and we would want to be open to that.
And finally, for some of the ones that we have listed here, have we gone through and researched, particularly between South and North Tech, what type of responses that we're getting for the investments that we're making in some of these particular ones that we are offering?
We do look at enrollment every year, and as that enrollment fluctuates, we do decide if that program is still viable for the investment, as you said, or if student interest is there even. And we've had some programs that we have discontinued due to lack of student interest. And we have, as you will notice here, we do have some courses that say South Tech only or North Tech only. And that's because there have been interest at those schools for us to keep those programs there, but they may not have been interest at the other schools.
Sorry, yeah, can someone just please elaborate or clarify to me, what's the concern about unions related to these programs?
Oh, well, in my I was noticing that some of the courses that we're teaching, of course, are unionized courses. And they, in turn, reflect what historically have been felt to be skills that you didn't necessarily have to go to college for, but you could make a comfortable living, particularly if you were unionized. And, you know, many of these courses, particularly in, as we're talking about, equity in North County, there's not a history of that kind of union support, union involvement. And so you find that students are not necessarily interested in those particular fields because there's no history that causes that interest to a larger degree. And so I know that in my touring the schools, I'm looking at the number of students that we have in various classes at the time that I've had a chance to tour. And it's called to mind, whether or not some of the investment we had made were actually paying off.
Sorry, so just to clarify, I want to make sure I understand the concern. The concern is that some students may be studying a particular trade at the SSD technical schools, but then when they graduate, they're not finding apprenticeships with the appropriate union.
That is true in reference to some cases.
Okay.
In reference to certain types of unions.
Is that something we can look into and get some data on?
Absolutely, I think.
That's obviously,
So at the March 9th board meeting, we're having a CPE update.
Okay.
So that, Kevin Andrew will give us an update. He gave one last year, so we'll talk about, the enrollment and the programming from North and South and.
Right. And are students finding jobs and apprenticeships after they graduate, and is there a difference?
Actually, our placement rate is pretty high. Yeah, very high, and I'm sure he'll share that.
The question would be North Tech and South Tech, and are there differences
Yeah.
in those placements?
He'll be sharing that data with you,
Thank
for sure. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm wondering, when you look at the technology, especially in some of the technical high school programs, like, you're looking at Cisco networking, things like that.
Yes.
Do you think a 5-year review cycle is sufficient? Or, you talked to about, advisory committees and relying on staff to tell you when updates need to be made.
And that's our advisory committees. That's a big part of their role because they are actually out in the industry. So that's part of their role, is to advise us when there are changes or updates, as you said, and then we would revise, that curriculum would not necessarily stay in that hole. It would come up
Okay.
sooner.
So this just means at least every 5 years.
At least every 5 years, correct. But if we did have a major change, you might remember a few years ago, Missouri changed all their learning standards, all 4 content areas in 1 year. And so that next year, we rewrote all 4 content areas. Even though it was not cycle, we wanted to ensure our students were learning the most up-to-date according to the state. So it's at least.
Okay.
Yes.
And this is very helpful, this document,
Okay,
or document.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
I
Yes,
one or 2 quick questions.
Yes.
One, to reiterate what Dr. I had written it down too. It's verbally said, a lot of them, but they're written out in their acronyms. So you can put in parentheses.
yes.
But then just the first time it's mentioned.
Yep, and I've tried to be better at that, but I'm sure I probably missed some as well. So if you have questions, yes.
Can you, for the tier 1, tier 2, I'm just turning,
The pyramid?
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
And can you, in your next one, have a little graphic of what is tier 1, what is tier 2?
Absolutely. Actually, I can include that in your Friday packet if you'd like.
Thank you.
Yes.
And when you refer to that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that's the same as the equity tier 1, tier 2, right?
Exactly.
It's the same.
Yeah. Tier 1 is everybody.
Everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tier 2 it's more specialized based on what the partner district is doing. Tier 3 is that additional added piece that is the expertise needed from the SSD perspective. But our instructional coaches are more your tier 1, and then you get the specialists in that tier 2 and tier 3.
So I'll include that in the Friday packet.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Next up is, so this is a continuation from the information that was provided to the board last February. So we're trying to keep it at the same time and consistency with the information that's being presented year-over-year. So we have Ms. Amy Schechter, our Chief Human Resource Officer, and then we have Mr. Dan Kelly, who's the Director.
Good evening again. President Cuneo, Vice President Brown, Board of Directors. As Dr. Keenan indicated, I'm Amy Schechter, the Chief Human Resources Officer, and I'm joined with Dan Kelly, Director of Human Resources. We presented some of this information last year at the February meeting. Dr. Keenan asked us to come back and provide that. So Dan's really going to go through just a lot of data with you, and as well as we can't really talk about this school year without talking about COVID-19, especially if you work in the HR department. So we do have some information in there about the data as related to that as well. So I'll let Dan walk you through the presentation.
Thanks, Amy. President Cuneo, Vice President Brown, Board Directors, Dr. Keenan, my name is Dan Kelly, Director of Human Resources. Kind of before we begin, I know Amy had passed out a little bit more specific information based on a couple of questions that we received that kind of breaks out the demographics, full-time and part-time. So that's included as well. As long as we attempted to summarize in our PowerPoint the retention data. So what we've decided to do is for our teachers, paras, and our administrators, give you our raw data dating back to 2015, 2016. So that's provided to you as well. So that's kind of where we pulled our slides from. So for our staff demographics, we report out what staff report to us, so broken into male, female, white, black, and then staff identified as other. We'll go into those categories a little bit more in depth. For a total full-time and part-time staff of a little north of 6,100 staff. I will say there's a slight disconnect on what Amy passed out, just because this is real-time pulled this afternoon versus what was...
So there's 8 more people on
right.
there.
So we've hired
8 more.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So as we kind of go into staff demographics by gender, as you can see, from 2020 to 2021, not much has statistically changed. The majority of our staff are identified as female, with a small percentage of our staff as male. And again, those stay almost identical to last year at this time. Next slide, please. So staff, as they identify themselves as race, again, keep in mind it's staff that identifies white, black, other, and then the categories of other, what makes up those categories as well. From a change from last year to this year is probably a 0.4% of increase in the number of staff that identify themselves as African American. So an increase. It's not as large as we would like, but nonetheless, it is an increase over last year at this time. Pretty consistent between white from last year at this time, as well as staff that identify themselves as other. Next slide, please. So a snapshot of our current vacancies. We look at our core job categories of administrators, teachers, student support services, paraprofessionals, and transportation. So from this time till last year, when we compare February 20, we have fewer administrator vacancies than we did last year at this time, fewer teacher positions than we did last year at this time, fewer student support services, so that would be speech paths, OTs, nurses, school psychs. Where we have seen an increase is an increase in our paraprofessional vacancies and also an increase in our transportation vacancies. And keep in mind, transportation as drivers and monitors. Next slide, please. So when we dive into our paraprofessional vacancy data a little bit more, you'll start seeing over the next 2 slides that we have a significant number of vacancies that have been vacant longer than 6 months. So this slide captures 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11-month vacancies, how long they have been vacant. So, as you can see, a significant core of our para vacancies are roughly 8 months, have been vacant for 8 months.
Why does Parkway stand out so much?
Well, Parkway has...
I was just going to say, they historically have had the vacancies, but then they also have been replacing those vacancies with substitutes. So that's been part of the issue that we are finding in our systems, that we have to clean that up, is that we should be putting full-time people in there as opposed to putting substitutes.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that, Parkway's 20, Rockwood is 3. I mean,
Yeah, they've been 20 for the last several years, Parkway.
Parkway has
Part
a
of
large,
the question whether they even need them.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if they're that open, but if they're filling them full-time with subs, then they need them.
Okay.
So that's where we have to make sure we're clear about what is needed and making sure we're hiring for those as opposed to filling them with subs.
thank you, Dr. Next slide, please. And again, we continue to dive in. So, you know, this slide will show you para vacancies anywhere from 12 months to 31 months, where a position has been vacant.
Are these unduplicated counts, or are they? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
outrageous.
That's great.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's tracked, and I think it's finally data that we're starting to push out a little bit more than we have in the past to make people aware that there's just a large number of vacancies that, quite honestly, pretty old.
Well, and it kind of shows us that our system, how do we make sure we're aligning? And I'm used to being in, you know, when you look at it, if you allocate for it, and then if you don't need it next year, you take it off, you know, it gets pulled back in.
Did Parkway exist then, the way I'm reading, maybe I'm reading that wrong, that they had a set of vacancies where they were not filled for 20 months?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Why do we even need them?
Yeah, that's what we're asking them to verify, if they need those positions continued, you know. And they have one for 31 months.
Yeah.
So that's over, you know, well over 2 years.
3 school years.
Going on 3 years. So, we're definitely,
Zero-based budgeting should
that's
take
what
care of
this is
that,
clarified. This is what part of what zero-based budgeting revealed, is that we have to look at the systems in terms of case management, teachers, which we've looked at, and then also now paras are, we have to dive deeper into the paras. So, we want to make sure that if a para is needed, that we're allocating for it. But if we have it on the books and we don't need those positions anymore, we have to find out what the positions are needed in order to make sure that we're accurately reflecting what we're budgeting for next year.
Next one. So this is, again, a snapshot in time of our current teacher level vacancies. Hazelwood currently has a teacher vacancy. Kirkwood has a teacher vacancy. Pattonville had one. Happy to report that hopefully soon a staff member will be coming to you for approval. South Technical has 2 vacancies. Webster Groves, similar to Pattonville, has filled that vacancy. Normandy is down to 1 teacher level one teacher position, and kind of a unique split between Ackerman and Northview that was approved recently, I think in the fall, for a math coach. That position has been vacant, been tough to fill because of the certification requirements. Most of the people that are applying are currently under contract, so we're hoping to have better luck when we post that again in the spring. I will say some of these vacancies, especially in Pattonville and Kirkwood, were a result of teachers being hired as administrators, so a promotion. So that's created a vacancy that wasn't there for them in the fall. And then we've also had about 5 mid-year retirements, so that's a little bit different than last year. Last year we had 1, but this year we've had 5 teachers that have retired mid-year. So that adds another layer of stress, because to try to find a teacher that's not under contract, that could then assume that that position has been difficult. And then we currently have 2 administrator vacancies, early childhood and Jennings.
We think that 5 retired mid-year is maybe COVID.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Excellent, thank you. So based on that, we're fairly consistent with what we would need to hire. So we kind of project every year. This year is no different, that we would need about 200 teacher level staff, so classroom teachers, speech paths, social workers, school psych. So about 200 teacher level staff. 250 paraprofessionals is kind of a number that we think we would need to hire. kind of keep up with our vacancies. Currently, just a snapshot, what we have is 21 teachers that have currently resigned or retirements for the end of the school year, 9 speech-language pathologists, a school psych, and then 2 OTs, occupational therapists, and then anything that also then is approved through the budget process would also become for next year as well. So that kind of gives you an overview of kind of what we have now. Many of these positions are obviously in the transfer fair, so we're kind of going through internal staff being able to apply for those positions right now. Next slide, please. So kind of a review of our hiring data. Hired 46 kind of 12-month administrator positions. Hired 172 teachers. 32 of them were from paraprofessionals to teachers. And then we did hire 1 facilitator. Next slide, please. Seems like a big number, 27 speech-language pathologists, 11 school psychs, diagnostic interns, hired 6 of those, 19 social workers. That was a big year for social workers. Nurses again, hired 11 nurses. And kind of another standout would be we've hired 5 ABA associates as well. And kind of, that's fine. And then we just continued. We did end up hiring 195 paraprofessionals, 7 bus drivers, 9 monitors, a dispatcher, 2 maintenance staff, 10 secretarial staff, and a desktop support, so in our technology. Next slide, please. So again, this was some information that was presented previously, but just kind of wanted to review it again. So our retirement data, so roughly 3%, or 8 administrators retired, 2% of our teacher staff retired, and 2% of our paraprofessional staff retired. I thought 38 was a good number for staff that were able to retire from, so that it kind of illustrates that you could make a career out of it. Next slide, please. So again, this is the raw data that we referenced. So this is the raw data that supports our PowerPoint up here as well. So when we look at our teacher retention, no surprise that our teacher retention kind of dropped a little bit. Not too drastically, but nonetheless a little dip from the last 2 or 3 years. And then as we look at our paraprofessional retention data, we actually retain more paras than we have in years past. And to a previous question, I do believe that was a little related to COVID and the uncertainty of the job market.
And I would just add the fact that we were so gracious to our paraprofessionals this past spring and as we moved into the fall.
Point. Slide. And then administrative retention, obviously, with the number of administrators we hired, we saw a decrease in retention rates as well. Slide, please. So the importance of this slide is basically kind of looking at our sub data and kind of really looking at December and January since the temporary increase in SSD retirees and SSD sub rate. So we have seen an increase in our fill rate. Not as high as we'd like, but nonetheless an improvement over the previous months from when the temporary pay increase went into effect. And then keep in mind, this is positions entered through Frontline, so Frontline is how we track our sub data. Next slide, please. So when we look at our recruitment plan, the heart of what we do on the teacher level side is our partnerships with our universities. We've listed many of them up here, Prop on Missouri State, SLU, University of Missouri St. Louis, University of Missouri Columbia, really any regional university that produces teachers or teacher level staff, we have a partnership with that we can then use to harness and get our staff through. Our next slide will go into a little bit of detail on what we use them for. So with those university partnerships, obviously student teaching continues to be a big push of ours. Obviously our goal is to employ our student teachers. Through student teaching internships, we also post all of our teacher vacancies on those university boards or their virtual boards that they push out to students. Our job fairs have shifted a little bit more virtual this year, but we're still attending job fairs. In some respects, it's been a nice reach that we can push out to universities that we normally might not go to. So, for instance, we did a virtual fair with University of Kansas, thinking that might at least expose us to students from the St. Louis area up in that area. Interview days, again, that's another big deal for our university partners. An opportunity to be face-to-face virtually with them, to kind of introduce ourselves. Many of these teachers have already applied and have already been interviewed by the time we have the event, but nonetheless, it's just another way to connect with them on a little bit more intimate level. And then a big push utilizing social media to continue to recruit staff.
Is there any way we can get into a university in the sophomore year? I'm figuring if you're 2 years into education, you might want to look at special ed. Nobody's ever talked to you about special ed, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Is there a way that we can get into like SLU or UMSL or SIU and talk to the ones that are second year education?
Absolutely. In fact, we've talked about maybe even at some of those intro level courses. So I know when we Skyped in last spring, this was third year students at Mizzou, they've already kind of into the special ed. So it's just a matter of calling her and asking if we can just access them a little bit earlier. Because obviously it's hard to, you got to get into education and then you got to get into special education.
Right.
So
That's why I was wondering to hit them about the sophomore year.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's an opportunity once things return to a little bit more normal that we can then push into high schools a little bit and harness our relationships with Special Olympics and career fairs at the high school level to at least expose them to the field of education. We're kind of at the mercy of what the universities provide us. So if we can at least expose them to a career in the field of education, and then we can then kind of maybe tie into their connections through Special Olympics or a neighbor with special needs that then might push them into special education. Absolutely.
If I may, on that situation too, then I've noticed if we're going to increase or reach out to try to increase the number of African Americans, I see no HBCUs that we seem to be.
I think on the next slide.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, and we'll talk a little bit about that with our partnership with Dr. Macklin as well. So our support staff recruitment, so it's really targeted advertising through social media, through print ads, targeted print ads, and then billboards. We're working with our communications department. We're really close to entering into an agreement to do billboards in the north area, south area, and then also the St. Charles kind of area as well to kind of frame the county to really kind of promote who we are and what we can do. This is also would be an opportunity to partner with our North Technical school to kind of expose the advertising and the promotion of billboards for students for North Tech as well. So we worked with our executive director of communications to kind of start formalizing that plan. Some things that we've done also tweaked a little bit on our support staff side is upon a para mainly applying, we pushed out our fingerprint and background check information. Historically, that was done when a recommendation came in. So someone wants to hire a para, then we would send them that information. In order to kind of speed that up a little bit, upon applying, then we push that information out to them. So then while they are doing their interviews, finding a location, they've already done their fingerprint and background check. So that kind of cuts that down a little bit. The other thing that we have done a little bit differently is our direct placement. So what we're working on as a candidate is ready, meaning cleared background checks and just needs a home. What we're doing is calling the applicant and really identifying what areas that they're willing or able to work in. Because what we're finding is that if we can meet them a little bit closer to home, then they would stay. So we're really calling and saying, hey, what districts are you interested in? And they may say, I'm interested in Hazelwood and Normandy. So then I would then directly communicate with the director of those school districts and say, hey, this candidate, someone that's expressed an interest in Hazelwood or Normandy, please do a site-based interview. So our goal is to kind of keep them a little bit closer to home, again, with the goal of trying to keep them longer.
Hey, buddy, curious, if we notice that then means that some school districts are preferentially filling versus others, is there going to be another process in place to motivate people to go to the spots where they're needed?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think it's also then educating the candidate on the number of positions. So if they say, oh, I'm interested in Lindbergh, I'll say, well, Lindbergh doesn't have any vacancies. You know, have you thought about expanding your circle, if you will?
Well, let's say Lindbergh has 1 vacancy and another school district has 7. I mean, is there a process to motivate them to say, hey, let's try to go there first?
Yeah, I think we attempt that, but I think what we're trying to avoid is making them drive 40 minutes, because we know then that commute's going to make them keep in the job market. So we're looking at our retention rate in comparison to our fill rate, you know, making sure that we can keep them. The other thing that Dan didn't mention that he does a very good job with, having experience as an administrator with one of our SSD schools, is in reviewing the application or the resume, he can kind of get a feel for if a candidate would be a good fit working in our SSD schools. And so making sure that they're sent to our school principals first to have an opportunity to talk with them about those placements, because they're often the most difficult to fill and have the highest turnover.
Really?
It's the perception that it's the harder students go to our SSD schools. So it's really educating that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dan's really working on changing that mindset, having that experience.
And obviously, the para side is new, and we'll kind of talk about how my role with the paras when we get to some updates on COVID. Next slide. So really, with our partnership with Dr. Macklin, who's our Director of Equity, we really identified universities that traditionally target students, minority students. So he has put us in contact with every university listed. Amy has a previous relationship with Howard University. So at a minimum, what we're doing with these universities is we've reached out and we've established a partnership where at least we are pushing out all of our vacant job positions, all of our positions that are vacant, so that they're posting them virtually. Many of these schools do not have a special education department, but at a minimum, they're at least seeing who special school district is, what positions that we have available. So this is something that's completely new, that he, meaning Dr. Macklin, has really kind of partnered with us and said, hey, here's at least a starting point to develop an initial relationship. So that was new, that's exciting. Something that is a carryover from last year is our targeted advertising, especially in this, for equity in the St. Louis American. We also, I will go back and say, we also advertise in the Jefferson County Leader, is that what
I think that's what it's called.
Jefferson County Leader, which is another publication that has a well circulation in Jefferson County. And so we're advertising currently in those 2 newspapers.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Because I noticed that in looking at what we were talking about in reference to demographics breaks down again, and I'm looking at the difference in language, and I'm sorry if I'm being picky. One, we're talking about a recruitment plan. The other, we're talking about a partnership. So what's the difference? Because one seems to be an oh, by the way, and one is a main focus, and one is, well, if we get there, but we're not putting the main focus on it.
We have a very specific recruitment plan that we can send to you to share with the board. I can include that in the Friday packet if Dr. Keenan's okay with that. And a component of that is the university partnership.
Well, as I said, I noticed that we must list one as a plan, and we've got specific universities that we have listed that are definitely part of a plan. And to me, you would just use all of them as a part of the plan.
Well,
and whatever it is that you do at one, you would be doing the same things to nurture that particular interest or to even give an opportunity, legs that maybe some of these folks don't know that there's an opportunity that lists in that field.
And in many of these, Dan and I haven't had the opportunity to visit many of these universities because of COVID. They're not allowing that. But we have reached out, and we are looking to take it from a partnership to a formalized plan. As Dan indicated, many of them don't have a school of education that includes a special education certification. So in working with them to see what other type of degree programs do they have? Do they have the occupational therapy program, the physical therapy program, school counseling, whatever it might be that we could target? So this is really the first step, is just reaching out, seeing if they're willing to work with us. And all of these universities have agreed to work with us to make it more formalized.
Would Harris Stowe or Lincoln ever consider forming a special ed program and utilizing some of our staff to teach there?
Harris Stowe's gone through changes. They've had it, they haven't had it, they have it, they don't. But, you know, some of the larger universities in town, Maryville University, which has a phenomenal reputation in the field of education, doesn't have a special education program. So it's just really based on what the university feels is the best fit for them and for their interested applicants. If they can fill their seats without offering the program, a lot of time that's no motivation to add something new.
To your point, you know, in terms of recruitment plan or equity partnership, I understand that words matter, and to us, I will absolutely change that to be an equity plan. Not meant to offend anybody, it's just, but I understand. I think. So, obviously, COVID's had a major impact on the operations of human resources. So when we look at the FFCRA/COVID leave, so when FFCRA expired, and then we put in a temporary policy for, from federal.
Family First
Oh, yeah.
Coronavirus Response Act.
Thank you. So we've had 431 employees processed for a leave, and then we processed 512 leaves. So that what that means is that we've had an employee take multiple leaves for obviously multiple reasons. Here's a little breakdown on the level. We had 20 administrators take leave, 243 teacher level staff take leave, 200 paras have access leave, 29 transportation staff have taken the leave, and other, so secretarial, maintenance, facilities, staff that work at central office have accessed that leave. The reason provided, childcare, an illness, or they've been forced to quarantine. The type of leave, so 450 of them have been full leave, 62 of them have been intermittent leave. It's also impacted our department. We've had to adjust roles and responsibilities within human resources. So, for instance, I've slid over to do the hiring on
Everything.
pretty much everything, while Lynn Safley, who normally does the hiring for the hourly staff paraprofessionals, she is now being a little bit, she is handling leave options for staff, just because of the volume exceeded our capabilities. We've also brought in, during kind of that really heavy time before winter break, we brought in clerical staff, additional clerical staff, because what we found out is we were just not being as responsive as we would have liked due to the volume of calls, volume of emails. So we brought in clerical staff that they can answer emails, answer phone calls, because staff needed an answer right away, and we just weren't able to do that. So we were able to then bring in staff so that we could be a little bit more responsive to our staff.
I would just add, we didn't include the number on the slide because we're finalizing everything now, but if you'll remember, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act required employers to provide paid leave for certain situations until December 31st. So we can get that raw data to you by employee group, but it's just under $1 million that was expended by the district on these leaves.
I have a question. The leave type full, what does that mean?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Full versus intermittent leave?
Yes.
So a full leave is I'm going to be out, and I'm going to be out for the next 3 weeks because of a quarantine or because of a COVID diagnosis or because I'm ill, and my doctor has said because of my complications that I need to be out. Intermittent leave are sometimes taken, if you remember, the board approved GBBDC, the temporary policy for the non-paid COVID leave, and that allows staff to take an intermittent non-paid leave. So in this situation, like for example, my child's school district is in person 4 days a week, but every Monday is a virtual day, and I don't have anyone to watch my children on Monday, so I'm going to need to take off every Monday from now until April 15th or whatever it might be when they're moving to 5 days a week or those types of things.
And then do we have is there an average of how long people are taking off for this line?
Not that we have right now, but we could go back and take a look and pull the numbers and see.
I was just wondering if is the average that 14 days or is the average much longer?
Fortunately, we have not had many staff in the district that have had serious complications and have had to take serious, long leaves for serious illness related to COVID. Not saying we haven't had any,
Sure.
but we've been fortunate.
Thank you.
And a lot of our leaves have been preventative, staff with condition that might make them more susceptible. They take their leave, or they have a child who is compromised and they're hesitant to come back to school. So they access the leave that way as well.
I don't know if that was the last slide with questions.
Thank you.
Question?
Thank you. Thank you for our last presentation. Dr. Haas, on the budget update. So this is the last presentation prior to the board approving the preliminary budget at the next business meeting. So Dr. Haas will update you on the rest of the process.
Thank you. Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Brown, Board of Education, and Dr. Keenan. My name is Jeff Hogg, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I'll present this evening on the FY22 budget process in preparation for a preliminary budget being brought to the board on February 23rd. As we spoke about at the last meeting, the budget was created around 4 goals. We discussed those in depth, but just to review, the first goal is that special school district will continue to provide necessary staffing supports for students in our schools and partner districts. The second goal is that special school district will continue to provide curricular support for our programs so that our programs in our partner districts and our schools can remain robust. Third goal is to provide safe and educationally stimulating facilities for our students and staff. And the fourth goal is based around equity. Every student, regardless of ability, socioeconomic status, will have access to the services they need. And again, the major budget assumptions, they have not changed since the last time we talked. We're still waiting on guidance. But just to reiterate, the property tax, we're looking at a 1.4% increase to the tax revenue. This is a reassessment year. Historically, the personal property tax goes up 2%, real estate goes up about 8%. You can't take that increase. You have to take it at the rate of CPI, which is inflation, and that's your 1.4%. And so we'll look at an increase in tax revenue in the area between $4.4 to $6 million. And then this next bullet is all our DESE payments. So that's Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We receive those on a monthly basis. When we talk about the basic formula, we're talking about the foundation formula. When we talk about Prop C, we're talking about the 1-cent sales tax. And when we talk about the Classroom Trust Fund, the Classroom Trust Fund is revenue that is paid to the district through DESE on a monthly basis, but it's funded by the state gambling and lottery revenue. And so that was set up several years ago when that was put in place. There's a formula that pays that to the districts on a monthly basis. So when you hear Classroom Trust Fund, that's your gambling and lottery money. And then again, we talked about investments. They'll decrease again next year because the interest rate isn't there. Disproportionality will remain at that $5.5 million as we go. And then the curriculum budget, as you heard earlier, will increase this year due to centralized purchasing. And so again, these are the main revenues, main sources of revenue. You have your local and your county, and those are your taxes and your fines and your forfeitures. They're reassessed again reassessed every other year. So your odd years, you'll see an increase in those. The state revenue is from DESE. Right now, we're using very conservative numbers because we don't have the guidance out. DESE puts out guidance generally in March and April about what numbers to use, but we don't have those yet, so we're looking at some conservative numbers. An example of those conservative numbers, with the foundation formula, there's a student adequacy target. This year it's $6,375. That number fluctuates from year to year. Right now they haven't given guidance on that, but that's the main number they plug into the foundation formula, so you know what your revenue will look like. So we're using just some conservative numbers around that, so we're not looking at an increase for next year as of yet. There's an annual amount for Prop C that the state gives. There's an annual amount for the Classroom Trust Fund. So again, right now, conservative is the word to use with those, but as you look at the state line here, this will probably increase as we go. If you look at the screen or on your packet, you'll see the circle in the top right. I wanted to draw your attention to that. What was budgeted last year, or for FY21, this current year, is $315 million in local revenue. You'll see FY22, we're projecting $321. That's where we're going to capture that increase in assessed valuation. And
I can understand where housing is going up. Is commercial property going up?
that's one of the areas that we're looking for guidance on from the assessor, and we should get that sometime throughout the spring.
My understanding is dropping like a rock. That's.
When they look at it, they assess it if the building is vacant or if it is inhabited. And so if a company is there and currently paying rent, they'll count it as assessed valuation, they'll count it as being inhabited. If for some reason they would, if they are virtual, they're still counted as being there because they're still paying rent on the building, so it's still inhabited. So we are hearing that there are some companies that have closed and left their buildings, so we're monitoring that as we go. And that's why I don't know if we'll be at that 8% total, but housing market's up, personal property is up.
Yeah, I saw housing go way up.
Right.
But I've looked at commercial real estate and it has not done well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we meet with the county assessor.
Companies cutting your overhead by not providing office space.
Yeah, we meet with the county assessor every spring, and so we're going to wait for guidance from him. And so then you'll see those two, and then you'll see on the bottom circle here, $480 million is projected for FY21. We have roughly $480 million again for next year. Again, that's based on the conservative numbers through DESE. You'll notice that it's down from 108 to 101. Again, that is just, a lot of that is projected until we know what that student adequacy target will be. So my guess is that will increase as we move closer to the spring. And then as we look at expenditures, again, the 5 areas, you have certified salaries, non-certified salaries, benefits, purchase services, and supplies, and then capital outlay. If you look at the 2 circles on the bottom, one area that I do want to draw your attention to is for FY19, we budgeted $461 million and spent $446 million. For FY20, we projected, or we budgeted 472, and we spent 442 million. And so as we move forward, we're spending approximately 96% of our budget historically. So what we'd like to do is continue to work to get those numbers closer so that the expenditures the budget represents a true estimate of expenditures as we go, so that we know that when we project 461, we're going to spend 461 million.
So what's your projection right now, Jeff, versus your 495 for this year?
If we look at historically being the 96%, we're looking at about 475 million. But we're going to continue to monitor that as we go throughout the spring.
And can you share with the board what is in the expenditures, that budget of fiscal 22 for salaries and positions?
Oh, yes. Yes. So when you look up top, Mark, can you go back on the screen? Thank you. So when you look up here in the very top right corner, the 196 we have budgeted will include approximately 3% increase in salaries as we start that process, and then the addition of the staffing that we're going to talk about this evening. So that includes that there. You'll see the reduction with the paras, and we'll talk about that, for a total of about $303,000. One of the reasons that it is in that range, we spend approximately 97.2% historically on salaries, and so as we try to get that to be a better representation, we're going to reduce that back down so that we're closer to that 98 or 99% of salaries. When you're looking at 97% at the rate we are, it's about $7 million. And so there is some room to adjust that and bring it back down, so it gives a good representation. As you look at expenditures here, we have 501. We're going to reduce that as we go. We're going to take a look at that. As you know, last time when we talked about it, we were at 510. And so just through identifying different areas right now, we've already reduced that to hopefully make that reflect more accurately where we're actually going to be. So just I wanted to give you a brief snapshot of revenue and expenditures over time. The blue columns are revenues, the green columns are expenditures, and so you'll see that over the past 4 years, we have had more revenues than we had expenditures. And so this year we currently have projected a deficit spending of $15 million. As we talk about that, the 495, if we look at the 96%, we're kind of in that 475, 480 range for expenditures and revenues, and that's kind of ideal because they would almost be even and have a balanced budget at that point. So this is something we're going to keep in mind as we move forward, but as you can see, over the past 4 years, we've continued to bring in more than we've expended, and we'd like to bring that into balance. So these next slides, we have worked quite a bit over the past 2.5, 3 months to work with our schools, our departments, our partner districts to identify full-time FTEs, full-time employees that we would like to add, or that we would like to request to add to really help out our schools. This slide here is position requests for partner districts. When we looked at partner districts, we looked at 3 different areas: special education programming, and that is just the normal year-to-year process of adding staff. So if a partner district or a partner school would say, we need this position, they'd come to us, they'd say why, and we'd look to add it. Another thing that we did this year was case management. One of the numbers that we looked at was discrepancies in caseloads. We used 15-to-1 as the ratio, so a student to teacher caseload ratio. What we found is that some areas we were under, and it was 11-to-1, 8-to-1, 12-to-1, and that was great. But where we heard some concerns, and what Dr. Keenan really wanted to do was look at lowering some of those case ratios that were 20-to-1, 22-to-1. And so as we researched it, the 15-to-1 became evident. And so when we talk about adding through case management, well, this is what we're doing. We're bringing down those case ratios to 15-to-1. And then disproportionality we've talked about, and that is adding additional staff to help partner districts with the requirement from DESE. Oh, and so on this slide, I'm sorry, Mark, I jumped the gun here. And so as you'll see on this slide here, through the partner districts, they requested 35 teachers, 3 speech language pathologists, 2 social workers for a total of 40 FTE. And what that looks like is through this regular special education programming, we looked at 11. Through case management, we looked at 21. And then through disproportionality, we looked at adding 7 through that. And then these are for our SSD schools and our early childhood. So when you see ECSE, that's early childhood special education. And so as we look at adding here, we're looking at adding 4.5 teachers, 5 paraprofessionals to the ECSE program, 2.2 occupational therapists and physical therapists, 1 social emotional behavior effective practice specialist, and then 0.4 speech language pathologist. And when you look at some of the 0.2s and 0.4s, what we're really doing is we're increasing from a part-time to a full-time. And when we do that with early childhood, there are guidelines where there are a certain number of students in the program, and then you get a certain amount of teachers. And so what we're doing as we expand that program, we're able to bump those teachers up from a part-time to a full-time to provide more support for our students. Or in this case, we're looking at, adding occupational therapists from a part-time to a full-time, almost doubling the staff there. So,
I have a question. Earlier, we were presented positions that were not filled for 13 months, 15 months, 16 months, 17 months, 19 months, 20 months, 31 months.
Yeah, sure.
In Paris. Why would we want 5 more? Why not get rid of the ones that we haven't filled for 31 months? I mean, that child's probably out of school now.
and you're absolutely right, and that's what we're looking to do in our schools and in the partner districts. With early childhood, we know the students are there, and we know that's a needed number.
Okay, but why not just move?
You're right, because, well, it's a different funding source with early childhood, and so we're looking at filling those 5, but we are looking at what you just said, with moving, we're going to look to reduce by 70-something positions, I want to say it's 73.
Right.
And those are, for the most part, all but 6 are para positions. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at those openings, those vacancies, and then if we need to add, we'll look about rearranging or reorganizing from within before we add any more paraprofessionals at that level.
Our 4.5 teachers, it would seem, if we have that many paras that have been open for over a year, I'm just counting the ones that were over a year, we can clearly fund 4.5 teachers.
Yeah.
And then usually what happens is somewhere in the course of the year, somebody tells me they want to switch, that, we want you to, this is not going to be a change in your budget, but you're going to take 3 paras and they're now going to become a teacher. We're going to switch the positions. Why can't we do this now?
Well, I think we want to eliminate that, we'll take the 3. If we eliminate the 3 positions, we eliminate the 3. If we request a position, we request the position,
Okay.
If that makes sense. I think that's one of the things I heard from the board, is we want to make sure it's clean, that we're not just switching positions and then we ask for more in the spring of the year. That we close out positions, but we know which ones we're closing out, and that's what we're looking at, those vacancies. We want to make sure that those vacancies are legitimate vacancies for positions that are required to support students. And we have all said that same thing too. How do we know that you still need that position for a student who's probably not even in that school anymore because the position's been open for so many months?
Good.
So, but at the same time, we want to make sure that if that program needs it and that school needs it, those positions, we need to make sure that they're all leveled out. Truly, this is a system process that hasn't been really well vetted and really well shepherded for the last several years. So that's where we're cleaning this up. The clear thing is around this is, as we go to this last slide around the vacancies, the reductions are vacancies. It's not people in positions.
Okay.
It is truly vacant positions.
Okay.
However, we will probably know a little bit more by the time we come back in May. We might be saying that those vacancies might be only 30 instead of, so many. So we're going to make sure that we're cleaning up all of those positions, so we know that what's budgeted is actually what we're going to be
Okay.
hiring for this next year.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just don't want to have 6 positions or 10 positions that have been vacant for,
Right.
well over a year, and I'm thinking, why do I even carry those positions?
Correct. Correct. We're at as well. I feel a little redundant. Dr. Bolton did an excellent job of requesting this slide earlier. These positions here, the majority of them are the ones that she did explain in her presentation. And so as we look at the SSD teaching and learning, these are positions to support our teachers and our parents. And so as you'll see, we need 1 technology teacher, we're requesting 1 technology teacher. That'll help with our 1-to-1 ratio of 1-to-1 computers that we're going to. We're looking at adding 3 speech-language pathologists for the disproportionality, and that will coincide with 3 school psychs that we currently have to provide better resources for our students. We're looking at 4.4 occupational and physical therapists, and again, that is adding to part-time, and that will actually give us about 8 district-wide. We're looking at 7 math and instructional coaches. That'd be the 5 math coaches that Dr. Bolton referenced earlier, and then 2 instructional coaches. 1 parafacilitator, that'll be a person who helps supervise paras, provide training, and make sure we're in compliance when it comes to that. 5 effective practice specialists, and when you see the AU, that's autism, and then social and emotional behavior.
I thought Dr. Bolton asked for 4 effective practice specialists, 2 of each.
She did. There's an extra one when it comes to student services as well.
I find it interesting on disproportionality. If they do their job well, they put themselves out of business.
Well, they just will go on because there's always a need, because you have new teachers coming in, you have new students coming in, so there's
But-
always going to be a need for the number of staff that we have.
But but I mean, that's, if they do well,
Yeah.
shouldn't that go down? And if that goes down, you may not need as many staff.
Yeah, but we always have new staff cycling in, that's the thing. So it's like, if you have new staff coming in all the time, you still have to build that in to the process.
And then as we look, we're going to add 3 social workers district-wide. One assistant director for professional learning, and this will help with teachers, train on IEP goals, and how to take the IEP goals and put that into practice in the classroom for our students. And then 1 ABA coordinator, and that's applied behavior analyst. And then with minutes going up, as we talked about last time, we need to add 11 ABA associates to stay in compliance there. And so we'd be looking at adding 37.4 positions for teaching and learning.
Wait, let's talk about the ABA associates. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I thought when we were looking at that at one time, everybody was getting the maximum of minutes.
Right. So currently the ABA, we're looking through our, we're doing an internal review of it and the focus areas and looking at best practices with the ABA programming. But what this is saying is because our minutes keep going up, we have to make sure we are supporting the students and the staff with the appropriate, to be able to support those ABA minutes. So as we're reviewing things, we still have to look at how do we make sure this trajectory, that we have to look at the now time in the minutes, and then we'll look at what the programming.
But we are not saying that we're going to get the maximum number of ABA minutes from now on out at every IEP.
It absolutely should be decided based on the student need and the IEP.
Because everybody was getting the max numbers.
Well, there was
Not
a trend of
everybody,
that,
but let's just say 90%.
Yeah.
We're getting the max number, and I found that kind of goofy.
Right, we just want to make sure it's not a one-size-fits-all, we want to make sure it is a support, and it's a necessary support.
Okay.
ABA is a great program,
and it's a
and if
good
we want to
program.
make sure that we're supporting, but yes, we have to make sure that these are minutes that are decided upon through the IEP process.
Are students who have IEPs that are not educational autism IEPs, can they access ABA, or is it strictly students who have the
Yeah,
IEP?
they can, but it's generally, the autism is in that programming, but if, the student might have another health impairment.
Or
another-
intellectual disability.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, so it's not exclusively, right. Most of the students do have the autism, but it's not exclusive.
And just in our conversation, Dr. Keenan, doesn't this reflect more identification in the North County area of?
Yes, there's more of that piece of this. One of the things that we've been seeing is how do we make sure that we're accessing, that students across the county are receiving it, and we've seen more supports and ABA minutes going into like the North County. I think there was a perception that it was more so in Parkway and Kirkwood, but it's also, we're seeing the increasing of that programming up in our North County.
And then lastly, SSD, Special School District Business and Operations. What we'd like to do is we'd like to add 2 grounds crew members, and you see the asterisk, that is offset by a reduction in contracted services. Currently, we pay about $57,000 for landscaping, and what that entails is a company to come in and mulch and weed a couple times a year. And then we spend about approximately another $120,000 to $150,000 in contracted services. For fence lines, for hedge lines, for tree trimming, tree cutting, and all those things. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to reduce those 2 contracts and hire 2 people to solely on grounds. It will pay for itself in the first year. We have all the tools, we have all the equipment, and this will give us greater access to when we need things done. So if we need a fence line trimmed, or if we need, something done for one of the buildings, we can have it done right away as opposed to waiting for 2 or 3 weeks on there. And then lastly, one of the major issues that's come up is we'd like to add a distribution center hauler. Basically, that's for surplus. One of the main things that we need to do is we need to get handle on the surplus in our buildings and around our district and at the distribution center. And so we'd like to request someone to, specifically for hauling, so they can move the surplus, we can identify it, and we can get that back to where we need it to be. Because right now, we're storing a lot of old equipment that either we're not using or is trash in our buildings, and that's eating up a lot of room that our schools could use for our students. And so if we'd like to do that, to dedicate one person solely to that.
Question about the grounds crew.
Yes.
Does that include snow removal as well, or would that be a separate contract?
Right now, that's funny you bring that up. We brought snow removal in the beginning of the year back in-house. And so we were contracted out through Pooltron or Pool Tech at the beginning of the year, and what we found over the last 3 years was our cost was going up and up and up exponentially. And so what we did is we purchased 2 salt houses, for lack of a better, salt buildings. We purchased some spreaders and everything else, and our guys have done amazing. The two snows that we've had, they did great. We were up and about 3:45, 4 o'clock this morning. They were out, they were salting, they were plowing. So they have done a great job with getting that going.
So you've done that already, and the grounds crew just be the lawn.
Yep, and then equipment upkeep in the winter if they can't get outside, but we've got enough projects we can keep going all year.
Thank you.
And so as we look, we're looking to add, or we're requesting to add 93.5 positions. And when we look at that, we look at a price of approximately $8.1 million. We're looking to reduce 79 vacant positions, as we've talked about, for $4 million. And I can see the wheels turning. You're thinking, how can those two numbers be that close? And we're looking at a discrepancy in those numbers. When we look at the 8.1 million, the majority, actually all but 8 of the 93 positions are certified staff. And when you look at certified staff, you're looking at a replacement of $80,000 to $90,000. That's all that time when you can include salary and benefits. When we're looking at the 79, we're looking at, I think all but 6 are in that para-facilitator or that para-educator role. And when we look at that, we look in the area of $45,000 to $50,000 for a replacement. So that's where that discrepancy comes in between those two numbers.
We had at one time a bubble of older staff that was going through, and this was our higher paid staff. It was like a bubble. I was watching it go through. It was like a python that had swallowed a pig.
It's all
And it
over
keeps-
the top.
No offense to the older folks, I like old people. We have a lot in common. But where is that movement now?
If you look at the distribution of salaries among our staff that are on the teacher salary schedule, they're predominantly in the lower right-hand corner.
Okay, so that.
Well, it's at the tail.
It's a tail now, okay.
Yep.
That's good.
Do the dollar amounts on here include benefits as well, or?
They do.
Yeah, that's that estimation you were saying, that includes salary and benefits.
Correct. All right, that brings me to the end of my report. Be more than happy to answer any other questions.
I have one question. In, I think, January, we heard a presentation about the 5-year technology plan. And I'm wondering, there were requests for staff in there, 4 or 5 staff. And I'm wondering what's the plan for that? They aren't in here for this coming year, so what's the plan?
So currently, through the budget process this year, technology did request 3 additional positions through the budget request process, according to that plan. What we looked at is, as we went through this, we're going to ask technology to take a look internally right now and see if those responsibilities could be absorbed with current FTEs. And that's where we're at. We'll revisit it as we go, but that's where we currently are with that.
Thank you.
And there were a couple other departments who
Yeah.
we've asked to do that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't just technology, it was other stuff. Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that's it.
I believe that is too.
Unless someone wants to stay here now another half hour, I would request that somebody make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Be safe driving home.
Yes.
Now, we can all stay here another